Dude. Dude.
Yes, we know you have a very lovely twisty tie. Now, shh. It's not better.
Hi.
Hello.
How's it going? We are coming back to you on a Monday. And not just any Monday. It's 4th of July, baby.
Yeah, baby.
You thought the 4th of July gift was us releasing the last chapter? Bang. It's actually us recording this chapter.
Which you probably won't get for another 2 weeks, so happy not 4th of July at all anymore.
Yeah. So anyway, we're back with chapter 7.
Yeah.
This one's called The Reconciliation.
Yeah, you remembered.
I did, yeah.
Proud of you.
Thank you. Do you want to give us a little brief refresher of what happened last time?
Yeah. What do you remember?
We went on a date with Lola.
Yes, we collectively went on a date with Lola.
We all did. Well, we were there on the date, so...
Yeah. Lola, down in Atlantis.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And then, yeah, that was pretty much the entire chapter. She, went on the date, had some fun, danced a little bit. Yeah, and then they went home.
She thought Birdie was going to be upset with her, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
And she definitely was not.
Yeah. Yeah.
She was like, cool, fun time.
Izzy had some guilty feelings about bailing, which, you know,
It
fair
just kind of
enough.
happens.
Yeah. And just a quick notice before we move on. Peacekeepers are now peace guardians. Just roll with it.
Yeah. As we mentioned before, this is the reconciliation. On the morning following the Ravens' day trip to Atlantis, Izzy woke up late. She wasn't totally sure what time it was when she at last climbed out of her bed and pulled on a pair of sweatpants and a tank top, stuffing her feet into a pair of slippers. With a viciously thumping head, Izzy slipped her phone in her pocket and began the long journey down to the kitchen. It wasn't actually that long of a walk, but to Izzy it felt like she might as well be climbing Mount Everest. When she arrived in the den of the kitchen a few minutes later, Izzy grumbled a quick "good morning" before sinking deep into a chair next to Sam and pouring herself a large cup of coffee. Woof. Omar grinned from across the table as he took in Izzy's disheveled state. Late night, I take it. You could say that, Sam mumbled under their breath. Izzy aimed a kick at them under the table, which missed and hit the table leg, causing the various dishes to rattle loudly. She grimaced, both out of embarrassment and out of pain. The loud crash echoed in her head, like one of those massive bronze gongs. Did you at least have a good time? Omar asked with a curious look, ignoring the ruckus his niece had just caused. Yeah, I met some cool people, Izzy said, gingerly nodding her head. Met? Sam objected, earning them an unappreciative glare from Izzy. Are you done? She asked them pointedly. A cheerful smirk tugged at the corner of Sam's mouth as they shrugged. Omar just chuckled, stuffing the last bite of his buttered toast into his mouth. Nothing wrong with a little bit of fun, he noted reasonably. I just hope you're ready for the day we have ahead of us. It won't be easy, you know. Izzy swallowed a gulp of coffee and guilt. In the midst of the excitement of visiting Atlantis and then meeting Lola, Izzy had completely forgotten that Birdie had scheduled an introductory course to battle magic today. If she had remembered, Izzy probably would have gone a little easier on the drinks. Well, maybe not. Liquid courage and all of that. When Omar left the kitchen a few minutes later, Izzy swiftly turned her focus to her cousin. What the hell? She swore in her hushed voice. I thought you were on my team. Why would you think that? Sam replied with a grin. Izzy scowled as she sank further down in her seat. Dick. Brat. Sam mumbled back in a casual tone, returning to the newspaper they'd been reading when Izzy first arrived. She shot them a glare that would have entirely proved their point, but which was fortunately blocked by the large pages of the Midnight Daily. About 20 minutes later, Birdie appeared in the kitchen and ushered the two teens into the garden at the back of the mansion. Izzy hadn't had a chance to explore the surrounding area much since they'd started her ceremony preparations, but it felt really good to be outside and enjoying the day. It was unseasonably warm out, and the sun shone bright and hot on the mansion. In the backyard, the air smelled of a million different herbs and plants that Izzy couldn't identify. The ravens often found wildlife like bunnies, foxes, badgers, and hedgehogs hiding in their bushes or underground, most of which they allowed to stay as long as they behaved. It was also here that Tom had encountered his favorite reptile, Lacey the snake. She was back in the garden now, snoozing contentedly on a large boulder. A single wooden bench stood at the far end of an expansive herb garden, separating Bertie's herbs from Tom's vegetable garden. Beyond the two gardens sat a wide clearing of freshly mowed grass. It was in this clearing that Tom and Omar now stood waiting for the teens. As they spotted Izzy and Sam approaching, Omar indicated for the two of them to take a seat, but Tom hurried forward and pulled Izzy aside before she had a chance to sit down. He waited for Sam to reach their father, then turned to Izzy with excited eyes. "Here," Tom muttered quickly, stuffing a small vial in Izzy's hand. The vial contained a pink liquid which bubbled and fizzed even though the little cork still plugged the opening. "What is it?" Izzy asked with a curiously raised eyebrow. "It's a little morning after potion that I came up with back in my day," her grandfather replied in a hushed voice. It was clearly nothing he'd shared with the rest of the family. "It's not exactly FDA approved, or approved by anyone for that matter, but it does the trick in a pinch. I heard about your little arrival at breakfast and figured you might need it." When Izzy looked up at Tom, it was with newfound admiration and respect, not to mention deep appreciation. She thanked him several times and made a mental note to ask what other potions Tom had come up with. Clearly, the man was a damn genius. Before returning to join Sam, who sat cross-legged on the grassy lawn, Izzy quickly downed the potion and felt an instant wave of relief crash through her body. Her headache faded in a matter of seconds, her stomach stopped making a fuss, and the bright sunlight became slightly more bearable. Tucking the now empty vial into the pocket of her sweatpants, Izzy hurried over and took a seat on the ground next to Sam. "Welcome, teens," Omar spoke in a booming voice. He bore a wide smile and had removed his shirt to allow better flexibility. A detail which caused Sam to cringe out of second-hand embarrassment. "Today, we will be exploring the basics of battle magic, courtesy of myself and the legendary shapeshifter, the master and your grandfather, Thomas Raven." Izzy whooped and showered the two men with applause, while Sam politely clapped their hands together. Tom gave an appreciative little bow before taking a step back to make room for his son. Omar went on to explain that, to begin with, Izzy would just sit there and observe their techniques, an instruction Izzy was more than happy to follow. She and Sam made themselves comfortable on the soft grass, and then watched excitedly as Tom and Omar turned to face one another. Over the next few hours, Izzy was introduced to a wide array of spells and curses that might come in handy during a fight, including one which caused the victim to experience visual hallucinations and another which threw the victim several feet back. While Sam grinned delightedly at the sight of Omar knocking his silver-speckled father off his feet with the power of a racing rhino, Izzy was fascinated by the wonderful curses that came from her mysterious grandfather. Spells which could render his opponent temporarily blind, throw them off balance, or cause his feet to sink deep into the ground. Although Tom and Omar both grew increasingly tired and drenched in sweat as the morning passed into early afternoon, their captivated audience members encouraged them to keep at it for much longer than had been planned by Bertie. But then a thought occurred to Izzy. She leaned in closer to her cousin, not wanting to interrupt the presentation. "I thought Tom was a shifter," she commented under her breath. "Yeah," Sam confirmed, their eyes still glued to the sparring match. "Then how can he be casting spells? I thought only witches could do that." Sam cast their cousin a quick glance. "His grandmother was a witch," they explained. "Battle spells are the only kind of witch magic Tom is able to do. Not that it matters. He's amazing." Izzy nodded in agreement. Tom was a monster in a fight. His hands moved with the speed of lightning, conjuring various spells and items, which he used to his advantage to pummel his son into the ground. Omar wasn't bad himself, though. He was clearly a skilled fighter, dodging nearly half of Tom's assaults and launching powerful spells in return which Tom simply had to bear down and suffer through, being too slow to get out of the way in time. When 2 o'clock finally rolled around, Tom and Omar could both be found doubled over and panting in the backyard, exhaustedly reveling in the wild applause they were receiving. Sam had gotten to see a handful of battle spells throughout their studies, but since they were focusing on anthropology like their dad and grandmother, they had never been lucky enough to see a performance like this. A few duels here and there during the holidays, sure, but never a proper display like this one. Izzy, on the other hand, was simply astounded. Obviously, she had never seen anything like it in her whole life, but not even in her wildest dreams could she have imagined how thrilling it would be to watch two skilled fighters go head to head. "That was amazing!" Izzy beamed as she and Sam got up to greet Tom and Omar. "It really was," Sam agreed with their usual subdued excitement. "I thought you weren't interested in battle magic," Omar asked at once, regarding their kid with a curious frown. "I don't like it when people touch me," Sam shrugged defensively, "so sue me." "I get that," Izzy concurred. "I quit karate when I was 8 because I don't like being forced to wrestle with total strangers." Sam shot their father a satisfied smirk, but Omar just rolled his eyes as he summoned a couple of towels from thin air. He handed one to his father and then proceeded to wipe the sweat from his face and neck. "That, however," Izzy pointed excitedly at Omar and Tom. "I want to learn all of that." Omar and Tom both looked extremely pleased to hear this, but they suggested that the group go inside for lunch before continuing. Having noticed the way her stomach grumbled and growled throughout the fantastic presentation, Izzy agreed with this proposal at once. "Your dad is really cool," she told Sam as they followed the two men into the house. "Yeah." Sam agreed with a bashful smile. "It's easy to forget when he acts like such a nerd all the time. If you value your free time, never ask him about Native American lore." Izzy snickered a little at this. Carmen was a big old nerd too, and if you weren't careful, you'd get stuck listening to a 2-hour lecture on why the space race between the United States and Russia was all a big media stunt. Izzy had been caught in this trap on multiple occasions, and she always ended up learning something new against her will. When the four ravens entered the kitchen, their noses were immediately assaulted by the delicious scent of excellent Mexican food. Bertie and Victor had worked together on the large buffet for almost 2 hours. They explained that at first the plan had been to serve burritos, but then they got worried that Izzy didn't like burritos, so they added some alternatives. Izzy appreciated the gesture, but their concern had been pointless. She adored basically all Mexican food and would eat anything presented to her. As the ravens dug into the delicious and wide variety of dishes, Victor sat back with a glass of what looked like wine but obviously wasn't. Izzy couldn't help but to stare at him as she downed her third enchilada, but Victor didn't seem to notice or care. In the end, Izzy couldn't keep her tongue in check anymore. "Is it true that vampires don't have reflections?" she asked after swallowing a large bite. She was a little concerned that she'd offended him, but Victor just smiled. "We do have reflections," he replied in a calm tone. "But they are able to separate from their hosts and travel on their own." Izzy thought about this for a moment, taking another bite and chewing slowly. "Why do they need to travel on their own?" she then asked, food still in her mouth. "Some send their reflection to deliver messages," Victor elaborated. "Others may instruct their reflection to keep watch over important locations." "Is that what you do?" Izzy asked with cheerful curiosity. "No," Victor replied with a gentle smile. "My reflection is permitted to go wherever and do whatever it pleases. However, most of the time it stays nearby." "That's cool," Izzy grinned. "Have you ever been hit by a car?" Sam's fork dropped to their plate with a loud clang as they turned to stare at their cousin in bewilderment. "What kind of a question is that?" they demanded to know. Well, it's not like he'd turn up in a rearview mirror, would he? Izzy argued reasonably, prompting Sam to roll their eyes dramatically. I did receive a light tap in a parking lot once, Victor admitted, although the excitement in his voice could have suggested that he was discussing the day's weather. This vampire certainly didn't emote much, and Izzy briefly wondered just how much time Sam had spent with him in their childhood. Told you, she told her cousin, sticking her tongue out at them. It was still a dumb question, Sam maintained stubbornly. There's no such thing as a dumb question, Victor stated plainly. Well, that's not true, Izzy countered at once. There are plenty of dumb questions. Just ask my teachers. I used to ask them all the time in class. She spotted Bertie and Omar chuckling in amusement on the opposite side of the table. They had apparently been listening in on the kids' conversation with the vampire. Sam, who had not yet noticed this, continued with their argument undisturbed. I'm just saying that if you're gonna ask a question, then you should at least ask an interesting one. Victor is a vampire after all. You may ask away freely, Victor agreed. Izzy's eyes narrowed as she contemplated this excellent opportunity. Okay, she said after a minute of thinking. Were you born a vampire? Victor glanced at Bertie, whose cheeks flushed bright red. We, haven't gone into the details yet, she explained, clearly embarrassed at Izzy's lack of knowledge concerning vampires. Understood. Victor nodded before returning to Izzy's query. Vampires are typically turned, not born. I was born in 1302 in modern-day Russia, but I was not turned until 1335. As far as I could gather, that woman had also been turned, but there were a handful of true vampires. These were born out of magic and had been alive for much longer than you can imagine, and they are the absolute forefathers of all vampires. Wow, Izzy replied, her mouth hanging open in an unattractive manner. So the other vampire, did she bite you? How does that all work? Are you sure you want to know? Victor asked her, his eyebrows slightly raised. It's not particularly pleasant. Izzy nodded excitedly. Definitely. A bite is not enough to turn a human. First, close to all the human's existing blood has to be drained from their body. Then, as the human is on the brink of death, the vampire promptly infuses them with vampire blood. Infuse? Izzy repeated hesitantly, preparing herself to be grossed out. The victim may consume directly from the vampire, Victor continued casually. Or the vampire may inject the blood through a needle of some kind. I have heard that medical blood transfusions are all the rage today. What, do they just go to the hospital and ask for some assistance? Izzy smirked skeptically, but Sam chimed in before Victor could reply. Do you really think hospitals are run solely by humans? In all honesty, Izzy had never considered this. Are you telling me that hospitals are secretly run by witches or something? She asked. Sam shrugged noncommittally. But how has no one noticed that? It is true that witches make up a majority, Bertie confirmed patiently. But those witches will often provide specific charms and potions to allow other creatures to pass as humans and be part of the mortal community as well. Izzy stared at her grandmother. So, it's not just in hospitals? Well, think about it. Sam turned to her with a significantly less snarky attitude. Towns like Midnight don't exist everywhere, and a lot of people prefer to live in big cities nowadays, so magical creatures have to be able to pass as ordinary humans out in the mortal world. Using magic is the easiest way to avoid getting caught. Damn. Izzy let out an incredulous scoff as her mind struggled to take in this particular bit of information. She could only imagine how Clement would react to finding out about this. I wonder how many I've met without knowing it. Well, Tom groaned, then, standing up from his seat and giving his round stomach some satisfied claps. I think there's about time that we get back to our lesson. What do you say, kids? Sam and Izzy both agreed and got up to their feet at once. However, as Bertie's spell began to clear off the table, sending a whole slew of dishes flying toward the sink in the next room, Izzy's phone suddenly started to buzz in her pocket. Hesitant to even acknowledge the phone call after the previous day's catastrophe, Izzy stepped out of the kitchen to check who it was more discreetly. She wasn't about to get guilted into another conversation with Clement. As soon as Izzy spotted the caller ID, however, she picked up. "Lucas?" She answered, her voice full of surprise. "Hey." Lucas's voice sounded from the speaker. "I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I meant to, I swear. But it's been so busy around here with school and stuff." Izzy was stunned. Not angry, like when Clement had called, but just confused. "Why are you calling at all?" she asked. "I mean, we don't really talk. Like, ever." She didn't necessarily mean to sound insulting, but it was a fair question. "I know." Lucas sighed. It was hard to ignore the dejected sound of his voice. "How's school?" Izzy asked after a moment of silence. She couldn't think of anything else to say to her brother. She hadn't gotten along well for several years now, and Izzy was pretty sure that Lucas hadn't called her directly since she was at least 14. "It's alright," Lucas replied without enthusiasm. "It's still school. How's it going with the grandparents?" "Better than expected," Izzy admitted hesitantly. It was true, but she could tell that her brother hadn't called to just chit-chat. "Lucas, is something wrong?" "No," Lucas assured her a little too quickly. It's weird coming home and you not being there. I wish we had talked more, like we used to, remember?" Izzy did remember. She remembered it very well, in fact. When they were younger, she and her brother had been best friends. They'd shared everything with one another, and Lucas had always been the one person Izzy could talk to and confide in. Even when their parents were fighting or coddling the new baby, they could find solace with one another. Lucas had taught Izzy how to ride her first bike, encouraged her to stand up for herself, and even carried her home once when she twisted her ankle jumping on a trampoline. But then their mom had died, and then Lucas had started high school. Slowly but surely, everything had started to change. By the time Izzy left for midnight, she loathed her older brother. He was a traitor. He'd abandoned Izzy at the first chance of becoming popular, and he'd allowed his friends to treat her like dirt for months. "Did Dad call you?" Izzy asked, wanting to confirm her mounting suspicion. Lucas didn't reply right away, but the silence was telling enough. "He called last night," he admitted in the end. Izzy gave a weary laugh. "Of course he did," she grumbled, the bitter taste in her mouth seeping deep into her stomach. Typical Clement move. Get one of his kids to do his dirty work for him. "Bells, he just wanted to know that you're okay." "Don't call me that," Izzy snapped automatically. She hated that nickname, and Lucas knew that better than anyone. And if Clement actually cared, he could come see me himself. "We both know that you wouldn't talk to him even if he did," Lucas noted in a tired voice. "That's not the point!" "No," Lucas agreed, his voice suddenly seething with impatience. "The point is that you're acting like a brat, and you should just grow up already." Izzy's brain stopped in its tracks. That was the second time she'd been called a brat in one day, and she didn't appreciate it in the slightest. "You know what, Lucas?" She spoke through gritted teeth. "I think I preferred it when we weren't speaking." An irritable scoff sounded through the phone. "Fine, but you can't say that we're the ones not trying when you're the one turning your back on your family." "I'm turning my back on our family?" Izzy's voice was growing louder now. "Mom kept her entire family a secret from us. How am I the one turning my back on our family when I'm the only one who's even acknowledging their existence?" Breathing heavily and fully prepared to call Lucas out on all of the shitty things he'd done to her, Izzy waited for an answer. But she never got one. When she glanced down at the screen on her phone, she saw that Lucas had already hung up. Gritting her teeth furiously, Izzy stuffed the phone back into her pocket with unnecessary force. If that was the way Lucas wanted it, then that's the way it would be. Izzy was just about to go back into the kitchen when she turned around and found herself face to face with Omar. "Hey, kid," he said with a hesitant frown. "I couldn't help but to overhear the end of your conversation there." Izzy swallowed hard, ignoring the burning sting of tears behind her eyes. She crossed her arms tightly for support. Izzy had always hated the way her eyes teared up whenever she got angry. It made her feel weak, and it certainly didn't help that Lucas had used this against her more than once, calling her a crybaby in front of his stupid friends. "Is everything okay?" Omar asked in a kind voice, regarding Izzy with empathetic eyes. "If anyone knows about sibling disputes, it's this guy right here." He raised his hands, his thumbs pointing to his chest, and Izzy couldn't help but to crack a small smile. She liked this big, friendly guy. He reminded her of the person Lucas had been. "Come on." Omar set his hand on Izzy's shoulder and nodded toward a door behind her. "Let's go in there and talk in private." Giving into her uncle's offer to help, Izzy followed him into the little room with a fireplace where she and Bertie had first gotten to know each other. Blinking away her urge to cry, Izzy slumped into the same chair she'd occupied the first night in midnight. "It's my stupid brother," she told Omar grumpily. He nodded wisely as he too sat down. "Lucas, right?" "Yeah." Izzy started to pull on some loose threads from the chair's armrest. "We used to be really tight when we were kids, but then, well, high school." "Ah." Omar nodded with the air of deep understanding. "Yeah, high school can be tough on a kid. Cause them to make some bad choices and pretend to be someone they're not." "Tell me about it," Izzy agreed with an exasperated sigh. "Lucas became a total douchebag once he started hanging out with those football nerds. He totally shut me out and started to rat me out to Clement whenever he could." "Classic older sibling move," Omar agreed, nodding gravely. When Izzy glanced up at him, she regarded her uncle with dull curiosity. She didn't actually know that much about Omar aside from what Sam had told her. Big, dorky, with an interest in traveling. He was a lot like his parents. "Are you the older one?" Izzy asked tentatively. "No," Omar replied, his eyes taking on a mournful glint. "Camilla was 3 years older." He and Izzy looked at each other in silence for a moment. "It's still kind of weird how we don't really know each other," Izzy noted awkwardly, and Omar gave a slight chuckle, though the bitter undertone was evident. Then he leaned forward in his seat and knitted his fingers together, his eyes falling to the floor between them. "Having siblings is hard," he said in an earnest tone. "I know Sam always wanted one, but I don't think they've realized that they're the lucky one here. Watching your sibling make stupid choices and not being able to do anything about it, it's not easy. To be honest, I've always resented Camilla for leaving the way she did. No warning, she just climbed out of her bedroom window one night and never came back." A wave of energy rushed down Izzy's back as she stared at her uncle. This was the first time any of the Ravens had actually talked about Camilla like a real person, rather than just some kid who'd made some mistakes. But Omar made it sound like Camilla had been worse than Lucas, worse than anyone ever let on before. How was Izzy supposed to feel about that? "She just left?" she asked, hoping to finally get the full story of Camilla's life. "Well..." Omar glanced up at Izzy, but as he looked at her, it was as if he was waking from a dream. He suddenly looked uncomfortable, like he'd slipped up and said too much, and it was evident that he wanted to leave the conversation at that. "Well?" Izzy pushed, staring him down. She refused to let Omar get away without telling her more. Omar pursed his lips for a few seconds, then sighed. "She made sure that we wouldn't worry about her, that's for sure." His eyes drifted anxiously to the door they'd entered through. But no, she didn't say anything. Izzy frowned. What does that mean? Did she run away to join the circus or something? In a matter of speaking, it's a long story. Leaning forward in her seat, Izzy prepared herself to finally get some answers. Whether they were good or bad didn't matter now. Omar opened his mouth begrudgingly, and then Sam appeared in the doorway. They hesitated, sensing the strange tension in the room, before announcing that it was time to get back to work. Apparently relieved to avoid the uncomfortable conversation, Omar fled the room right away, leaving Izzy with more questions than she'd had before. She glared furiously at Sam as she stalked out of the room, blaming them for the interruption, but she knew that it hadn't been on purpose. Still, Izzy couldn't stop thinking about what Omar had said. She made sure that we wouldn't worry about her. How did Camilla do that without saying anything? And what was the long story? Izzy knew with absolute certainty now that there was something her family was hiding from her, and she was determined to find out what it was. For now, however, she had to focus on battle magic. Once Omar had taught Izzy and Sam the basic moves of physical magic, the technical name for battle magic, and Tom had given them an overview of a number of beginner-level curses and hexes, the two teens were ready to get to work. Starting off aiming at a couple of straw dummies, which Omar had summoned with a single snap, the cousins practiced one spell after another under the strict supervision of their relatives. Omar or Tom would step in to correct something whenever they saw fit, but otherwise let the kids work on the spells in peace. When Izzy stood in front of her target, focusing her magical energy into a spell like she had been taught, she was strongly reminded of her knife-throwing lessons she'd attended when she was younger. Clement and his wife had always been very protective of their children. Every summer when they visited their summer house in the mountains, the Kingsley couple would make their kids attend various self-defense classes. While Lucas managed to put his training to good use in school sports, Izzy always hated being shoved into a group of sweaty people looking to beat each other up. Eventually, Camilla suggested that they should find something else for Izzy to protect herself with. Clement had apparently taken the task to heart. He'd managed to find a handful of professionals from various fields willing to instruct Izzy, but she had fallen in love with knife-throwing the first time she had sent a blade zooming through the air. Her teacher was quite the interesting character, too. Izzy had always secretly suspected that she was a mobster of some kind, although she never found anything to prove this. After spending almost an hour practicing with the dummy targets, Sam and Izzy were pitted against one another in a practice duel. According to Tom, it was a completely different matter to aim a curse at a real living person than at a doll. Still harboring the rage from her conversations with her father and Lucas, not to mention her interrupted discussion with Omar, Izzy found it surprisingly easy to channel her anger into a magical force field with which she repeatedly knocked Sam on their ass. However, Sam also proved to have a talent for battle magic, and the two teens were soon drawing on every ounce of magical energy they had left to try to gain the upper hand in the fight. When a solid 2 hours had passed since their wonderful lunch, Omar finally called the class to a finish. The two teens were sweaty and sported a number of vicious bruises, but they felt proud of themselves. The workout had helped Izzy to process some of her feelings, and her anger had mellowed out into a dull irritation. Obviously, we hope that you have both learned a lot, Tom started off in an important voice. But I have to say, we're immensely proud of the great improvements you've made here so far. Battle magic is difficult to master. It takes a kind of internal strength that is hard to come by in these times. But you two have upheld your family's legacy well. We couldn't be more proud. We know you have the skills to become excellent peace guardians, if you so choose. Which we hope you don't, Omar added under his breath. Sam and Izzy were still snickering about the stern look Tom had given Omar as they were walking back to the mansion. Bertie greeted them at the door, offering to serve tea and cookies in front of the sitting room fireplace. Sore and bruised after their lesson, the teens accepted. They slumped into 2 armchairs and took turns telling Birdie all about what they'd learned so that they could stuff their faces with butter cookies. They told her all about which spells they'd learned and then used, and about the spells they'd seen Tom and Omar use and now wanted to learn. Birdie looked both impressed and concerned when Izzy told her that she and Sam had been allowed to duel for a short while. Eventually, Izzy even mustered up her courage to apologize to Birdie for taking off the previous night. Even though Birdie had insisted that it had been all right, and that it was important for young witches to make friends and to enjoy the good things in life, Izzy thought she noted a distinct stuffiness in her grandmother's voice when she excused herself a few minutes later. Sam and Izzy stayed in the dimly lit and musty room for a long time, enjoying their tea and cookies and appreciating all of the fun they'd had in spite of their sore muscles and drained energies. Yet, when Sam recalled the pride they'd seen in Omar's face when they had successfully cast the dancing man on their cousin, Izzy's mind wandered back to her conversation with Lucas. She knew he'd been right. If Izzy refused to listen when they reached out, then she was the one keeping them from having a relationship. But still, she couldn't stand hearing Clement and Lucas criticize Birdie and Tom when they didn't even know who they were talking about. Really, all of these issues boiled down to the same problem. Camilla. She'd left an enormous mess behind, and now Izzy was having to pick up the pieces. Sam's distant voice suddenly breached Izzy's bubble and brought her back to reality. "What are you thinking about?" they asked. Izzy heaved a frustrated sigh. "That you're right. I can be a bit of a brat. Sometimes." Sam shot her a skeptical frown. "What made you finally come around?" "Lucas called today." Izzy grumbled back with a grimace. "Oh, joy," Sam muttered, their voice seeping with sarcasm. Izzy chuckled half-heartedly. "It wasn't great. But now I'm thinking that maybe that was my fault." "That sounds about right," Sam shrugged. "So what are you going to do about it?" Izzy thought about it for a moment, then looked at her cousin with resolve. "I think I have to make a phone call." Sam gave her an approving nod, and Izzy got up to navigate her new and confusing home back to her bedroom. Once her boots had been tossed to the floor in unceremonious fashion, Izzy crawled onto her bed and placed a call to her brother. She hadn't done that for a long time. Lucas was only 2 years older, one of the reasons they had gotten along so well when they were younger, and Izzy had thousands of good memories with him. Building blanket forts, watching movies, playing spy, fishing at their summer home, playing with baby Carmen when she first came in the picture, and then bringing her into their antics with them. They'd been so close for so long, and Izzy could still vividly feel the sting of betrayal when he'd suddenly withdrawn into his own world. "Yeah?" Lucas's voice suddenly spoke through the phone. "You're right," Izzy blurted out before she could change her mind. "What was that?" "You're right. I was acting like a brat and a hypocrite, and I'm sorry. Are we good?" Silence followed for a few seconds. "Yeah, we're good," Lucas then replied. Izzy could practically hear his smile. "Good," she stated firmly, her stomach relaxing slightly as her anxiety settled down. "Now tell me, how is college, really?" She heard Lucas sigh on the other end. "It's a pain in the ass," he confessed, his voice noticeably lighter and more relaxed. "I don't know why I decided to go to medical like Dad. It's so confusing and so boring." Izzy snickered as she fell back in her bed, fluffing up the pillows behind her neck. "Well, yeah. You've never given a shit about medicine. You should have gone for something you're actually interested in." "Yeah, because I'm a total idiot," Lucas replied sarcastically. "I don't know what I'm interested in, smartass." He sounded frustrated, but Izzy still enjoyed hearing his voice. It was such a huge relief to be able to talk to someone from her old life. Since speaking with Nicole on the train, Izzy had completely forgotten to reach out to her friends in Manhattan. But they hadn't tried to contact her either. In spite of her best efforts, Izzy couldn't completely silence that voice in her head that was always telling Izzy that her friends were better off without her. Why don't you just stick to gen ed classes for now? She suggested, forcing herself not to think about her old friends right now. See if you can't figure something out. That's what I've been doing, Lucas mumbled. Oh. Yeah. So that's what's been going on with me. What about you? How are the mysterious grandparents? Are they as awful as we imagined? Izzy frowned as she considered how to answer. They're actually pretty great. Really? Lucas's voice rose almost a full octave from surprise. Yeah, but it's also kind of weird, Izzy went on. Obviously it's weird because we don't actually know each other very well, but it's more than that. It's like they know this totally different version of Mom. And what do you mean? I mean, like... Izzy trailed off as she tried to straighten out her thoughts. Well, you know how kids are aware that their parents had their own lives before they had kids, but they don't actually know anything about it? Sure, Lucas replied in an uncertain tone. Well, the person Mom was before she became, our mom, was apparently a completely different person. Well, what was she like? Lucas asked, his voice full of curiosity. That's kind of hard to explain, Izzy sighed. But trust me, it's crazy. And get this, we have an uncle and a cousin. Oh, come on, Lucas cried out at once, ever the cynic. Izzy shook her head. I know. I was blown away too, but it's true. All this time, Mom had a younger brother and a nibbling, and they're both awesome. Our grandparents are super nice too. They eat like every meal together, and the food is great, and they're always trying to help me to get used to living here. Lucas fell quiet for some time, and Izzy could practically hear the gears turning in his head through the phone. She was just about to ask if he was still there when he suddenly started to laugh. It wasn't a happy kind of laugh, though, but rather one based in disbelief. I can't believe Mom, he exclaimed once the laughter had run out. Why wouldn't she tell us that? I thought our grandparents were total nutcases, especially with how much Dad likes to complain about them. What else was Mom hiding? A lot, Izzy replied. I don't know much yet, but every time I ask about her, I find out something new. Well, then tell me what you already know, her brother argued impatiently. It reminded Izzy of when Lucas used to bug her for information about his Christmas presents. Look, I can tell you, Izzy assured him, but you won't believe me. Try me, Lucas dared her. Mom was a witch. I don't believe you. Lucas, I mean, a witch really is? Did Grandma tell you that? You really have been talking to Dad, Izzy muttered irritably. Well, you can't seriously expect me to believe that, Lucas stated reasonably. I didn't expect you to believe it, but you did ask. Izzy heard Lucas draw in a deep breath and instinctively knew what he was thinking. Even if you don't take the witch stuff into consideration, a steaming heap of weird news had just dropped in Lucas's lap. Camilla had a family, a great family, that she had tossed aside and then badmouthed for almost 2 decades. Why? What are their names? Lucas asked, and Izzy got to work listing them all. Grandma Bertie, Grandpa Tom, Uncle Omar, and Cousin Sam. Oh, and Victor. He's, their butler, I guess. Really? Lucas repeated, suddenly distracted. Bertie? That's what they all call her, Izzy replied with a shrug. Her real name is Drizelda, though, which isn't much better. Poor child. Lucas chuckled for a moment, then heaved a deep sigh. Man, Mom really just pretended that they didn't even exist, didn't she? Izzy couldn't think of anything to say, so she just let the question linger. It must be pretty weird for you, Lucas continued, living with all these strangers. It was at first. But, Luke, they're really cool. Sam and I are total buds, and Bertie has completely taken me under her wing. Pun intended? Lucas snickered. Unintentionally, actually. Izzy grinned. Seriously, though, they're nice. Well, then I don't get it. Why didn't Mom ever mention them to us? Izzy could hear Lucas frowning on the other end of the line. I don't get it either, she conceded. It doesn't make sense. Why would she just abandon these people when they obviously loved her so much? Have they told you anything about why she left? Lucas asked. You won't like it, Izzy warned him. Lucas paused as he considered this. Tell me anyway. She left because she wanted to live a life without magic. That's moronic, Lucas shot back at once. Or insane. I don't know which is worse. I told you. Izzy sighed with an exasperated look on her face. I'm going to need to see some proof before I take this seriously. I hope you know that. He insisted in a serious tone. Yes, sir, Izzy assured him with some sarcasm thrown in for good measure. You know, if you came up to visit, I could show you everything. Never say that again, Lucas said, his voice suddenly horrified. It makes you sound like a prostitute, or at least, like, really slutty. Oh God, shut up, Izzy grimaced, knowing full well that her brother had heard the rumors his supposed friends had spread about her back in high school. On the other hand, the longer they spoke for, the more it felt like old times. It was as if the past few years had never happened, and Izzy, for one, was thrilled at the change. She never would have guessed that a little bit of distance was all it took to mend their broken relationship. I will, though, Lucas pushed on. Come up and visit, that is. I can't just sit by and let my little sister be trapped in the middle of nowhere without her favorite brother. You're my only brother. And whose fault is that? Lucas asked in an accusatory tone. Izzy's face drew into a confused frown. Well, definitely not mine, she argued. When do you have a break next? Thanksgiving? Lucas replied, although it was more of a question. Izzy's mouth drew into a pout as she considered the options. Odds are that Clement will be too busy working to actually plan anything. So maybe you could suggest coming up here for the holidays, to be with family and all that. Oh, Dad will love that, Lucas snorted, although Izzy could have sworn that he sounded kind of pleased at the idea. What about Carmen? You sure you're not stupid? Izzy asked. Bring her, obviously. That could work, Lucas agreed hesitantly. But will the grand folks be okay with it? I wouldn't worry about that, Izzy assured him. Bertie is gonna flip out when she hears you're coming. It'll be a rager. I'm actually not even sure they celebrate Thanksgiving. Well, okay then, Lucas announced with a sense of finality. I'll talk to Dad after Halloween sometime and let you know what he says. And you'll talk to Tom and... Bertie? Don't make fun, Izzy warned her brother. But, yes, I'll talk to them. Speaking of Halloween, though, Lucas went on, a mischievous edge to his voice. Do you have any fun plans coming up? Or is midnight full of retired old windbags? Izzy bit her lip. This was a tough question to answer without sounding like a total lunatic. Or worse, making her grandparents sound like total lunatics. She was sure that neither option would make Lucas feel better about coming to visit. I guess you could say I have plans. What, do they not celebrate Halloween either? No, they do, Izzy told him earnestly. Just not in the way we're used to. Okay, that's not weird at all, Lucas lied. Why not? They're just kind of old-fashioned. Izzy grimaced at her own lame excuse. You'll get it when you meet them, I promise. Right. Lucas scoffed skeptically. Well, don't forget to have fun while you're in discipline camp. I won't, Izzy promised. Oh, if Lucas only knew what discipline camp was really like. He'd be jealous. And text me once in a while, would you? I promise, Lucas replied. With that, the two Kingsley kids called it a night and hung up. But Izzy stayed sitting on her bed, grinning like a child for several minutes after the call had been ended. She couldn't properly express how happy she was that she was finally back on speaking terms with her brother, and the prospect of him and Carmen coming to visit for Thanksgiving was more than she could have possibly wished for after their previous conversation. Biting her lip with unreasonable excitement, she got back up and went looking for Sam, whom she'd found a few minutes later in the exact same spot where she'd left them. However, when Izzy went to sit back down in her old seat and tell them all about the phone call, Bertie appeared with the announcement that dinner was ready. Noticing the look on Izzy's face, Sam lingered back enough so that they could talk in private before reaching the crowded dinner nook. I assume you got a hold of him? Sam asked as they walked toward the kitchen. You assume correctly. Izzy nodded, her eyes glowing with delight. We talked. I apologized, and now we're all good. That's awesome, Sam said excitedly. They were clearly surprised that Izzy had managed to keep her cool for long enough to make up with her brother, but Izzy didn't care. It is, she agreed. Lucas also said that he's going to try to come visit for Thanksgiving. At once, Sam's face fell into a look of mixed apprehension and discomfort. You realize that we don't celebrate Thanksgiving, though, right? I told him that, but he still wants to come. Did you tell him about magic and everything? Sam asked in a significantly quieter voice as they entered the dining nook and took their seats side by side at the large table. Yes, Izzy said under her breath, passing a large bowl of mashed potatoes to her cousin. Not that he believed me. Well, that's understandable, Sam noted as they loaded their plate with a large mountain of creamy potatoes. What are you two whispering about? Omar's voice suddenly called from across the table, causing both Sam and Izzy to jump in their seats. Oh, they're just like you and Camilla when you were young. Tom chuckled in his seat at the head of the table. A warm smile spread across Bertie's face at the pleasant memory. Always hiding away, she reminisced fondly. Scheming and planning some new prank to pull on those Devon urchins. Good times, Omar agreed with a wide grin. We were just talking about how Lucas wants to come visit, Izzy told her grandmother, barely able to conceal her enthusiasm. As expected, Bertie lit up and stared expectantly between Omar and her husband as her hands started tapping the table in a rapid rhythm. Oh, it's finally happening, she cried out, too emotionally wound up to speak in a normal volume. Both Omar and Tom laughed a little at the old woman's reaction, but the way they couldn't stop smiling told Izzy that Bertie wasn't the only one who was eager to meet her siblings. She glanced over at Sam, delighted at how the news had been received. I suggested that he should bring Carmen, too, Izzy added, enjoying the morbid kind of satisfaction she got from watching Bertie's overwhelming joy. While Tom calmly removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with a neatly folded tissue, still smiling in spite of his misty eyes, Bertie began to pull repeatedly on the front of her blouse, presumably giving herself a cool breeze to cool down. All four of you under the same roof and everything, she stated with a distant look in her eyes, gazing at Izzy as if she had just won the Nobel Prize in family mediation. I can't think of a better way to spend that useless holiday. The good mood lingered in the air throughout the evening. During the meal, they discussed the absurd nature of certain mortal holidays and recounted the adventures Bertie and the teens had had in Atlantis. Izzy even got to hear a couple of stories about Camilla and Omar from back when they were kids, although these tended to leave the group quiet and anxious. At some point, Izzy leaned across the table and thanked Omar for helping her with Lucas earlier in the day. He replied with a kind smile which was somewhat muddled with sadness. When Izzy sank back into her seat, she thought about how hard it must have been to have to leave them all behind. She couldn't imagine cutting these people out of her life voluntarily. Camilla really must have been crazy if that was the life she'd wanted. As the evening began to draw to a close, Tom enchanted all of the dishes to migrate into the kitchen and begin to wash themselves while Omar summoned a tray of tea and coffee. The ravens remained gathered at the dinner table, enjoying the last moments of the day until Bertie at last got up and announced that it was bedtime. Although Izzy didn't particularly want to go to bed, she was beyond ready to finally get her ceremony over with now that she had a handful of spells ready to show off. Those judges wouldn't know what hit them. Izzy would make sure of that. And that's the end of the chapter.
Yeah!
That one was so fun. We got to see some battle magic.
We did.
We
got to meet Lucas a little bit more.
Yeah, a little bit more. Got to kind of reconcile with him after they've been apart for so long.
Yeah.
He's a cool guy. He kind of just seems like one of those good friends that you just had forever and that you've been fighting with for a while, and you kind of just come together at some point and you're like, you know what?
Like,
this is stupid.
Let's make up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's very sweet. Very nice.
The next chapter will be fun.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
And we look forward to reading it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll be me or you, but...
It'll most likely be you.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next one's the
Shifter.
The Shifter. Right.
Yes.
And Tom's a shifter.
He is a shifter.
Yeah, Tom's a shifter.
Yeah.
So... Oh, I wonder what it could be about. And I guess with that, we'll see you next time during that next chapter.
Yeah.
The Shifter.
The Shifter.
Thank you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, all that fun stuff. We'd like to grow this, get more people listening to our book.
Don't forget to check out our Instagram, Whiskers Witches Wine. It'll be a good little reminder of, hey, there's a new chapter out.
Yeah. And you may even get to see how long it takes us to actually complete a chapter.
Yeah.
So
it'll be a great timeline for you.
Yeah, it'll be great. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Bye. Oh, wait. Happy 4th of July. All right. Bye. Well, I'm sorry, babe. This is not gonna work.
Yeah, it's not the best place for you to be right now. But you're really soft and fuzzy and cute.